Since I started, how my job has changed over the years. I started in '88 when I graduated from college, and at that time, digital meaning tape digital, like 3348, and in Nashville, which was really the only place it took off, was the 32 track format. Those were just really starting on the upswing, and everything was primarily still analog tape, 24 track analog, and it was done. Records were done the traditional kind of way, which was you go to a studio, you came and tracked, then you did overdubs, then you mixed it, and all of that happened on analog tape. And vocal tuning was very, very much in its infancy. Any kind of editing to us was, if you liked this take and that take, then you took the 2-inch tape and you cut them and put them together, and that was kind of the way you that was the way you did it. And so from there, when we first started using say analog or a digital tape, then you had, my goodness, 48 tracks. All, how can you ever fill that up? Or and then it got to, well, if we slave two of these machines, then we have 96 tracks, and that you can kind of get overkill there. And everything was mixed on an analog console, so any sort of recall, any sort of change to a mix was kind of difficult and expensive, time consuming, all those things. And then we got into the radar system, which was mainly just sort of a replacement for the 24 track analog machine. It was a digital recorder that just had sort of limited editing capabilities. Then we got into the computer thing, and all of those at this point, some people grow up knowing only one thing, and I'm fortunate to have been through all that and to see what kind of effort it takes to do one as opposed to the other, and what benefits, detriments, anything that comes one to the other. And at some point they all just become tools, and it's all how you use the tools that you have. Technically, things have gone from an analog piece of gear like a compressor or an EQ that you had to plug into, to plug-ins, to all this kind of stuff. And it used to be, when I first started, you wanted everything to be a piece of wire, to have no color whatsoever. Now, just from a personal aspect, I like to have lots of color and run it through all the analog stuff before it goes into the computer. So it's just different ways of looking at things. And to make an analog tape sound its best, you had to bias an analog tape. And if anybody needs to know what bias is, probably can look that up somewhere else to get a further explanation of it. But each track, we figured out we liked a certain bias on the snare. If the kick was going on that track, the bass, the guitars, vocals, whatever, we'd bias all those tracks differently, so that you really try to maximize what the analog tape did for each individual track. And it's a little more, so you don't really have that capability in the digital world with converters, although you could use different converters on every channel if you wanted to, but that's sort of prohibitive. But technically, the way mics were constructed, because excuse me, in the 40s, mics were all based around tube amplifiers, and then the 60s and 70s they all changed over to solid state amplifiers, and then the tubes have kind of come back into vogue, and so gear kind of comes in and out of vogue as far as outboard gear. And then from a business model, the business is nothing at all like when you first started, because even in the last 5-10 years, because with the advent of digital, everybody can record in different places. Most people go into their houses nowadays. Um, there are you can go to a live location and get great recordings, um, and then you can deliver those recordings to people who want to buy them, listen to them, consume them, however, in so many different ways, rather than going to a record store and buying a record, which was a big piece of plastic, about that big when I first started, and now it's a file that goes from computer to computer. So the way all that is delivered, I'm not a big on the business side of it because I don't do that a lot, but um, all that all that stuff has changed just as much as the recording side. So um, everything everything flows and ebbs, and it will and always will.